So our lead this hour, we continue our in-depth team coverage all night long. We'll do it live. Our lead from Houston. That was the second half of the Christmas doubleheader in the NFL with Beyonce shaking her tushy at halftime. You had Lamar Jackson and his band of merry men leading the Ravens traveling caravan into the Lone Star State. It was supposed to be a good game. Baltimore favored on the road, if you're into such things. So the gamblers that set the line said the Ravens should win that game by, 5.5, and they were going to wrangle with the Texans. And it's the second half of the Netflix doubleheader. And if you did not watch the game, consider yourself lucky. What a turd burger. Woo! Man. Supposed to be a slobber knocker, and it was none of that. So we watched for you. Baltimore controlling the game. A domination situation for the Ravens. 251 yards on the ground. They didn't throw the ball much at all. They didn't have to when there was matador tackling. Ole, 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 ole by the Texans, who looked like they wanted to be home. They just had that vibe. You see that every once in a while in the holidays in sports. It just looked like they would rather be doing something else than playing in the NFL at that moment there. But 251 yards on the ground for the Ravens. Derrick Henry, huge start to the game, had 147 yards. And then Lamar Jackson. Watch Lamar run. He finished with 87 yards. And by the time the damage was done, 31-2. 31-2. The team from Maryland pantsed the team from Houston. And it was a record-setting kind of a day, a career accolade for Lamar Jackson, who has now surpassed the head coach at Norfolk State, Michael Vick, as the NFL's all-time leading rushing quarterback. Not that quarterbacks used to run all that much back in the old days, but that's more of a modern record. But nonetheless, Lamar Jackson is the king of the running quarterbacks, and you figure he's going to play at least another 5 or 6 years at least. So those numbers are going to be up, and away. CJ Stroud, though, that's where the story is, the better story in the losing locker room. CJ Stroud, not only a quarterback, he was discombobulated as he attempted to play and was terrible from soup to nuts for the Texans in this game. And let us discuss. That's the story here. So where does this performance or lack thereof performance by the Texans quarterback leave CJ Stroud? So I've got lumpy, Apollo 13, and ugly relative. And we will combine all of these things together, and we are going to make delicious leftovers, which if you did it right, you'll be eating a lot of leftovers all weekend long. And some of that stuff just tastes better leftover. I don't usually eat leftovers, but like holiday food leftover, pretty good. All right, so number one. It's not number 3. It's number one. All right. So to answer the question, where does this performance by the Texans quarterback leave CJ Stroud? Searching, trying to find answers. I need answers. I demand answers. Wow. Befuddled by Baltimore. But I don't even know how much of this was the Ravens defense and how much of this was just total incompetence by CJ Stroud. He ended up with 185 yards. I'm shocked he had that many yards the way he was playing. He was sacked 5 times. It seemed like it was more than that. Threw an interception as the Houston Texans lose a second consecutive game. It was a numbing performance. There was a general sense of excitement around CJ Stroud that the Texans had their forever quarterback, that guys like Chris in Houston and the other guys that we have listening, they're all excited. Like, we got our quarterback now. We got rid of that creepy Deshaun Watson, and now we've got this guy. He's great and all that stuff. It was the type of performance. You're wondering what was going on. Is there something that we don't know about? Was it a case of the mourning process from his buddy Tank Dell being injured and having his leg mutilated, a macabre injury the previous week, and that, remember, CJ Stroud was crying regarding that injury. So is this a case where he just can't get the focus back because he was so upset about that? Does he just hate having to play on Christmas and he wanted to be somewhere else on Christmas? I don't have the answer to that. All I know is what I saw. And all I can react to is what I saw. And what I saw was bad to the bone. Bad. It was a wrestler. He'd be El Stinko, the wrestler. El Stinko here. Stroud served up a lumpy performance, as in a giant lump of coal. A giant lump of coal. He was, remember, don't forget, he was the offseason MVP. The people's choice from TV pundits. And now, how the mighty have fallen for CJ Stroud from offseason MVP. This is now 2 years in a row where the offseason MVP has fallen on hard times. Remember, a couple years ago, the TV people told us that Justin Fields was the MVP. Yeah, now, this past offseason, it was CJ Stroud. This is a plague. You are given the whammy. You're given the whammy when you were told you're the offseason MVP. So I went back. I was like, I've watched the Texans a lot. Now, I did pick them, not that we haven't even done the TV show. We do that later today. But I have to send to the producers of the TV show who I like in every game. And I did take the Texans, so that's part of the issue here. But C.J. Stroud had been bad, but this is a new level of bad. And there is a level of consistency in the wrong area, down in the sewer for C.J. Stroud, which is quite troubling. Quite troubling when you think about where he had been and where he is right now. The last 10 games, is that a fair sample size? 10 games? 10 games? The last 10 games, C.J. Stroud has averaged barely over 6.5 yards per pass. That's not good. His passer rating over the last 10 games is 78. 78. Not even college radio level. Not in the 80s. 78. 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and 4 fumbles. Who goofed? I've got to know. All right, now, page 2. So we take a look at the Texans in general. They're a playoff team. They're in the playoffs. Right now, they would be the number 4 seed, thanks to location, and they would play Pittsburgh on Wild Card Weekend. There's only a week to go and for them and these games this weekend. So are the Texans contenders or are they pretenders? So they're in the playoff party, but in terms of them being a contender, I give that as much side eye as I give the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of these teams, if they play each other, by default is going to win a playoff game. Right? So one of them will be on to the divisional round of the playoffs. Neither one of them is that good, but we're talking about the Texans. And that performance, I don't think we can just gloss over that performance. It was an island game. You're living the island life. Everyone's watching. Everyone's watching. No one's watching the NBA. Have you seen their ratings? The product's been bad. No one's watching that. Everyone's watching football, even a bad game like this. And that's your resume? That's what you put out there for the world to see? It was like NASA's Apollo 13 mission. Houston, we've got a problem. We got a problem, man. And if you're DeMeco Ryans, another darling last year and won all kinds of accolades for his job in Houston, he's got some explaining to do. DeMeco Ryans, the game was a measuring stick. How do you match up against a team that you could match up with down the line in the postseason if you're lucky enough to get to a further game and play Baltimore? And how did that work? Well, the Maller Misery Index for the Houston Texans following the game on Christmas, the Maller Misery Index, wheels fell off is what it says on the Maller Misery Index here. The team was both staggered and bedraggled. You can't be both. They were staggered and bedraggled in this game, and they just had no fight. The word that I jotted down on my notes app was gutless. It was a gutless effort by the Houston Texans. And that's one thing football people go nuts over. You can say, hey, you didn't play well or you played well, but if you challenge a football team and say you didn't play hard, that you were soft, they lose their mind. They absolutely lose their mind. We played some sound the other day from a certain NFL bigwig that got all upset, a coach of the Tennessee Titans. Callahan got all upset because a reporter questioned the toughness of his team. He got very defensive because that's taboo. You're not allowed to go there. But what I saw, and I'm just judging it off what I witnessed, was a soft football team, a team that just looked uninterested. They seemed annoyed they had to play this game. Maybe someone spiked their eggnog. I don't know. Maybe they had a bunch of weed brownies before the game. I have no idea. But either way, it was an emasculating performance. The defense went, forget CJ Stroud for a second, the defense went AWOL. How do you allow 432 yards? 432 yards, and you lose by 29 points if you're playing hard and you're a halfway decent team? The answer is you don't. The answer is you don't. And Greg Olsen mentioned this on the Netflix broadcast. He mentioned that Baltimore was not doing anything exotic. It wasn't like they were changing things around and they were throwing out all these wild trick plays. It was trickeration in the air everywhere. It was not. They were running a rudimentary offense. And they got the Texans defense got shoved off the line of scrimmage. They were players bouncing. Well, some of the time, Derrick Henry was running through untouched. At other points, he was just bouncing off would-be tacklers for the Texans. So it was, man, Baltimore just shoved it down Houston's throat, and they had no response at all. It was like a pity party for the Texans. All right, now, final point. So let's take a look at Baltimore, the winning locker room. Not the better story. I know we have a captive audience on a cruise ship right now in the Caribbean who checked in listening. Radio buddy of mine from Baltimore who might not be on a boat somewhere in the Caribbean listening on the free Wi-Fi on the boat. But we have been skeptical of the Ravens. Right? We've been skeptical of the Ravens. Do we now believe in Lamar Jackson? After this performance, do we now believe in Lamar Jackson's squad as legit, too legit to quit? So the short answer for me is N+O. No. And before we go to why, we must acknowledge that the performance by the Ravens, as Larry David would say, was pretty good, right? It was. But I maintain that is only possible because of a heartless effort, a lack of interest by the opponent, the Texans, that they were not there to compete. They didn't drink Modelo. They didn't have that fighting spirit. Okay, and in terms of the big picture, seeing is believing. Okay, seeing is believing. Baltimore has, I'll use the butterfly analogy or the caterpillar analogy, right? A caterpillar can either become a butterfly or it can become a moth. And in the regular season, the Ravens are the butterfly, and then in the playoffs, it's very odd. They go from butterfly to moth, and they fly right into a flame, kamikaze mission right into a flame. And it's, the ugly relative pops up of the butterfly, the moth. And before you send me a message, well, technically they're different species of caterpillar. I get it, okay. But for a long time, people didn't know that, and they thought that you either become a butterfly or you become a moth. That's what they thought. But things are just different in January football and regular season Lamar Jackson. We saw that in the game on Christmas. Regular season Lamar Jackson is a video game cheat code. Postseason Lamar Jackson is a video game glitch. That's the difference, right? Playoff Lamar. He pukes all over himself, rides the vomit comet, all that. Now, I've been told by my peeps who love the Ravens that it's different now because they have Henry. They have Derrick Henry. He's in the fold, so it's all different. Well, my philosophy on that, like my many friends in Missouri, where you can find the Ben Maller chicken fingers at the Landing in Liberty, Missouri. I've been there. Yeah, check it out. But the mindset is the mantra of the state of Missouri. It's the show me state. I'm in a show me state of mind. I don't believe it because the Ravens last year, people said it was going to be different. Oh, they didn't have Derrick Henry. They said it was going to be different last year. How'd that work out? Yeah. So don't tell me things are going to be better. I want to see actual tangible results. And you can't even really do that on wild card weekend. It has to be later on. Because early, not so much. Like right now, the Ravens, they are the number 3 seed. So they would play host to a West Coast team, the Chargers. And they would be favored in that game, and they should win that game. It's what you do after that. That's where things get really interesting.